So about 15 months ago, we were starting to think about what's actually happening with technology, and we hear a lot about individual pieces of technology. So we might have a presentation about some piece of kit and the widget and the software that runs it and that sort of thing. So we hear about the technologies themselves and what they can do. And we're hearing about individual farm experiences. So we'd often hear about somebody talking about what was actually happening on their farm, and fantastic to hear both of those. But the thing that seemed to be missing was actually an understanding of what's actually happening at an industry level. So what's actually happening in New South Wales, who is using technologies and how are they using them? And the opportunity came up funded through the New South Wales Dairy Industry Fund for us to actually ask some of those questions. So that's what we've been doing. So we're trying to get a bird's eye view. And the heading for this platform is, are we learning lessons from technology? And so our particular project was really to say, can we learn what farmers are doing to be able to share some of that wisdom with other farmers? And can we also get a sense of what's happening at an industry level for the industry to learn some lessons about what might be needed and what direction we might go? So the particular technologies we were interested in were focused around things that made it possible to know something or do something with an individual cow. So we weren't focusing on soil meters or feed or those things, but it's the individual cow management factors. And we were really interested in kit that is out there and commercially available. So it's we know that it fundamentally works, but how is it actually being used and how is it working on farm? So we had 4 target technologies we wanted to ask about: auto drafting, bale feeding, inline milk meters, might do volume, might do components, might do mastitis detection, and activity meters. So things that are out there in the commercial world, how are they actually being used on farm? And all of those require some electronic identification. So we were interested in looking at how electronic ID was working in conjunction with them. And many of them, the benefits, or some of the benefits, could be harvested or coordinated through herd management software. So we wanted to ask people what they were doing with their software as well. And early on, somebody said to me, oh, well, technology, you want to keep it simple and straightforward, basically. And I said, okay, well, that's what we'll call the project then. So it's TechKISS, keeping tech simple and straightforward on farms, and just understanding how that's happening. Whoa. And away we fly. Thanks, Patricia. We've almost got this into a system now. So the concept, the project rationale was saying we think that perhaps what's actually out there across the industry looks a little bit like this, and if we knew more, could we help contribute moving to this? So we think perhaps what people have been telling us is that a lot of technology is used independently, but it would be great if we knew more to be able to contribute towards it being able to integrate on farm. We think that there's a lot of data being generated, and yesterday afternoon somebody asked Will Russell about big data. It doesn't actually have to be big data, it just can be moderate sized data. There's still a hell of a lot of it being pumped out from some of those technologies. Can we move to where that's actually forming some information that can be used to really increase productivity? Not just at the individual cow moment when it's being used, but across the farm. We think that probably there's a lot of telling farmers what the tech can deliver, but are they actually able to get the tech to do what they want it to do? And is it only key people on the farm involved? Do we have a bit of key person dependency here? Or are we able to get everyone on the farm comfortable, everyone who needs to, comfortable to using the tech? So the idea was to try and learn enough about what was actually happening out there to help the transition from what we thought we were hearing to what might be a better place. So we did 3 things in the project. The first thing we asked, so there's 3 questions we asked. What products are available in Australia? How many New South Wales farms are using those technologies, and how's it playing out on farm? This is a New South Wales focused project because it's out of the New South Wales Dairy Industry Fund, and we're interested in what's happening in New South Wales. But a lot of the lessons, I think, have got some broad applicability across the whole industry, so contributing across the whole industry, and we're certainly interested in knowing what was available, say, for instance, across the whole of Australia. So it turns out there are about 20 manufacturers and suppliers who are actually providing commercial products out there for people to purchase within the 4 technologies that we were looking at. And there are about 80 different products. In the time that we've been doing it, it's a movable feast, so there's new things coming out. Sometimes it's the same actual bit of kit, but it's branded a different way or presented a different way. Sometimes it's a bit of kit with a different bit of software sitting behind it. So for any one of the technologies, you've got the widget and you've got the software that drives it, and so improvements or changes in those, changes in names, etc., etc. So we've had to have a movable feast as far as that's concerned, but we've created a full list of all of the technology, and just there's a bit of a sense. There's all the suppliers. There are the technologies that we're interested in, and they're all the products. What we asked the suppliers and manufacturers, and went and had a look at the specs, etc., to actually get the features of each of those. So, for instance, with the activity meters, we'd say what sensors are in them. So can they pick activity? Can they pick rumination? Can they pick temperature? What can they report? Do they pick out cows on heat? Can you get a sick cow alert? Can you get a heat stress alert? What are the various sensors, and what are the things that they report? What do they talk to? So which bit of kit do they talk to? Which bit of software do they talk to in terms of herd management software? How far does the antenna work? How long does the battery last? All the various things that you might want to know about each one of those products. So if you it's a spreadsheet, if you click on one of those products, it goes back and tells you the detail about them. Now, this is, I think, the first time that it's actually been brought together, independent, brought together in one place. And the plan with this project, which we're just winding up now and bringing together, etc., is to put all the materials on the New South Wales DPI website under their dairy part, and link across to where the appropriate places are. I'm sure good to have links into the right places in the Dairy Australia website, for instance. I haven't talked to them about that, but making it available basically for people to be able to use. And we'll have to think a little bit about how we make sure that we keep it up to date too. So there's an accumulation of what's actually available in Australia in that tech matrix. One of the things that comes out when you start to do this is that there are broad groups of types of tech, if you like, in terms of what talks to what. So if you're dealing with the large multinational milk harvesting companies who put this sort of tech out as part of their full suite, it all talks to each other within their suite. But there's not as much opportunity. I'm sure it's technically possible, but in terms of their marketing, they'd really like you to buy all their stuff and it's all within their suite, whereas they're a bit less interested in making sure that it connects into a whole heap of other things. Then there's suppliers who are more niche suppliers, if you like, often Australian based or Southern Hemisphere based, who are trying to do individual things for Australian conditions or for the type of market they're in. So, for instance, you might have somebody who's building a herd management software package, and they want to have an auto draft associated with it, and they're actually based here in Australia. So they're very interested in being able to talk to each other if they possibly can, because that actually expands their market. And I'm not a tech person, so there's other tech people in the team, but when I look at it, I sort of think it's a bit like Mac and PC. You know, Mac wants you to do it all within their platform, whereas PC sort of took the angle, well, let's see if we can make it so that you can cross across a whole heap of different applications, or like iPhone and Android or whatever. So when you're actually thinking about putting kit together, if you have more than one of those technologies that you actually want to talk to each other, you've got to think about what the opportunities are, and depending on whether you go with the full suite that comes with your milk harvesting company, or you're putting a mix and match together, you'll have different challenges. And we've tried to capture people's experiences and wisdom around that, so that we can all learn from it. So the second thing we did was a survey of all New South Wales dairy farms. So the regional development programs were really supportive, partnered in with this project, and Subtropical Dairy, Dairy New South Wales and Murray Dairy all have client levy payer groups that they interact with, and at the same time in July, August, they sent out an SMS asking people if they would respond to a quick survey. Can anybody remember doing it? Oh, you probably get lots of surveys, but some people, thank you for participating. So they said to their farmers, if you can, please answer this, whether you got tech or not. Like we're not just interested in focusing on people who have already purchased some kit. We'd like to know about people who don't have kit as well, and we got 102 responses from the 650 farms that went out to. So across New South Wales, we got a 15% response rate, and we were really pleased about that. One of the questions. It was 2 SMSs. Well, actually, there was a note went out first up from the RDPs saying this is coming. So there was an alert that it was coming, and then there was an SMS saying, could you fill it in? And then 2 weeks later or 10 days later, there was an SMS saying, if you have filled it in, thank you, we love you. If you haven't filled it in, could you do it now? You know, it was simple to do, so it was only about 3 minutes. And I wasn't encouraging anybody to do it on the quad bike behind the cows, but you could have, you know. And so when we were sort of interested, is this a representative sample? We asked people to tell us what their herd size was, and when you graphed the herd size of the respondents, the people who'd answered, it was almost exactly the same shape as the graph of the herd sizes for New South Wales out of Dairy Australia's situation and outlook. So we're pretty confident that we got a picture across New South Wales. But having said that, you know, there's that's the picture. And then we went and did interviews and visits with 39 farms, and they were farms. One of the questions in the survey was, if you do have some of this tech and you'd be willing to talk more, would you like to? So some people self-identified, and DPI New South Wales helped us engage with some others, and so did the RDPs, etc. So we got to go to 39 farms. I won't say they were picked at random, they weren't. They were people who had technology and were prepared to talk. And we talked to 36 service providers, so that's the vets and nutritionists and herd improvement people, etc. I will say I was very, I thought we were privileged to be able to go out and have the opportunity of talking to those farmers. very tough year, very aware that it was a very tough year. People still took time out and were very, very open and helpful with the sort of things that they told us, etc. So, you know, we're very appreciative of how much people put in that context. So just a few quick pictures then. How much technology is out there on New South Wales dairy farms? 40% of the people who replied did not have one of the target technologies. So remembering auto drafting, computerised bale feeding, inline milk meters and activity meters. So 40% did not have one of those. Of the 60% that did, 22% had one of them, 18 two, working our way down, 7% had all four. So there's a picture of what's actually, and when you looked at the combinations, there was every different combination of 2 and 3. So what proportion of farms have these different things? The most common was auto draft, which was 38% of farms in New South Wales, if we've got a representative sample there. 35% for bale feeding, down to 26% for inline meters and activity meters. So that's just the raw figure. We asked people when they purchased and what they used them for and how satisfied they were, etc. One of the things about when they purchased that was really clear is that nearly all the auto draft was purchased more than 5 years ago. And nearly all 70% of the activity meters have been purchased within the last 5 years. Interestingly, that it probably matches up, probably there's a lot of drivers behind it, but one of the things is that in the last 5 years, the actual kit in activity meters has changed and has really changed. So the old activity meters were mercury switches, so each time the cow moved it flicked the switch to and fro, etc. And you could read them, you know, once a day when the cow, or twice a day when the cow came into the dairy. In the last 5 years, virtually all of the technology in the activity meters has changed over to being accelerometers that are in your smartphones and Fitbits, etc. And they can be read in packets, 15, 20 minutes packets, etc. So across much bigger distances. So it may be that the change in the actual kit itself has been part of that story. The other thing is that it's very related to herd size. So herds less than 300 cows, 13% of those herds have got activity meters. If you're more than 700 cows, 83%. And in the middle, if you were 300 to 700, it was 39%, I think. So, you know, it's very herd size related, and that's perhaps not a huge surprise either, but it's interesting to see how that is actually playing out. We asked how satisfied people were with the technology that they had. And this is just to remind me, really, to say to you that one of the things that really stood out was people were very satisfied with the technology that they had. We'd had sort of some stories before that of people being, you know, not very happy about things, and maybe some things that don't work so well, the message goes out. But in fact, for activity meters, 90% of farms that had activity meters said that it had made a significant difference to their business. And for auto drafting, it was 100%. Actually, with the auto drafting, that was interesting. A lot of people said that it's really the starting place. One of the pieces of wisdom, quite a few people said, if you're talking to people who don't have any of these technologies, getting your auto drafting right first is the sort of foundation to being able to make benefit out of some of the others. And certainly that they were very, very happy with, satisfied with the impact that that had made. So we can drill down on some of that data a bit more in terms of types of farms and what have you. Another thing just that I wanted to point out to you, we did ask what herd management software people used, and there's a lot of different software being used across New South Wales. The blue is Easy Dairy, the red is Jantech, so I'm not associated with anybody, so it's not a commercial story, it's just what's out there. So 49%, half of New South Wales dairy farmers are using herd management software that's Aussie derived, built in Aussie conditions by local Australian suppliers, etc. So they're often responsive, sometimes a bit key person dependent, but they have got relationships in there. But it also means that if you're using kit that comes from the multinational milk harvesting companies, it may be a little bit harder to manage your data transfer. 20%, 1 in 5, said they did not use any computerised herd management software. 20% of people ticked exercise book. Every single one of them was a herd less than 300 cows. So, people are making decisions and doing things with the information within their herds in ways that work for them. And if we assume that everybody's going to have a computerised system for their herd management or whatever, we're missing out on understanding that there's a chunk of people out there that are not actually doing that. So farm experiences, as I said before, we went out on farm. We really appreciated the time and effort that people took. People told us about climbing on roofs to get their antennae right, and how to set up leads away from auto drafts so that it wasn't too noisy for the cows, and how to set up ways that the cows went out so they couldn't see the treatment area, and how they chose kit, and whether they changed collars from cow to cow, and how they decided not to change collars after they'd broken their hand changing a collar, and a million sort of things that we're accumulating into tips and traps and wisdom from the field, and we'll also put those onto the DPI website. Of those 39 farms that we went to and talked to, 10 of them only had one of our target technologies, range of them, and just a little less than half had matching kit, where they had 2, 3 or 4 of the technologies. They were actually all in the suite from one manufacturer, and a little over half were actually this mix and match approach. I think what I could say is that the Australian scene is really complicated. It's a really complex scene out there at the moment in terms of all the different mix and match. Integration's not a given. There's lots and lots of farms that duplicate data entry and use technologies independently. Some people don't mind. They say, look, I've only mated 8 cows today. It really doesn't worry me to walk down and put 8 cows into a different system. It's sort of not a hassle. Other people are driven completely mad by it. So in many ways, it's the size of the job you've got ahead of you. If you're mating 30 cows, you don't want to be double handling and that sort of thing, but also just people's preferences. But one of the things to say out of it is, when you're selecting stuff as a guide, think about whether or not the data is going to integrate, or you're going to have to do double entry, and don't buy on a promise. A lot of people are waiting, having thought that it would get integrated and it hasn't over a period of time. So be prepared to do what it is that you're actually buying at the time that you buy it, I think is one of the tips that farmers told us. The other thing is there are no independent services that we could identify in New South Wales to help farmers choose or use these technologies. So there's plenty of support, and they look for support and get good support from their suppliers and distributors, etc. But in terms of finding someone who can actually help you collate data or choose things, etc., at the moment anyway, there's no obvious independent service. Maybe something that could be worth thinking about. Thanks, Patricia. We're a slick team here. So we asked farmers why, and largely they told us, reduce stress, automate things, be able to go away. Virtually all of the things that were driving them and that they actually did were associated with automating tasks with individual cows at that time. So there's a cow that I've just got an alert to mate this afternoon. I've got a cow pulled out to have a look at that might have mastitis, etc. All the day-to-day, minute-to-minute, immediate tasks. So that's what farmers are usually using them for. They're satisfied and they have a lot of experiences to share, and hopefully we'll do a good job of putting them together so they can share. However, there's nearly nothing happening with the data streams. Almost nobody is really actually using the data to do things at a herd level. So I've got my cow out to look at with mastitis this afternoon, and the 2 pulled out on Saturday and another one on Tuesday and 4 on Thursday, and I just do them. I'm picking on milk quality because that's an area I've got an interest. But do I have a bird's eye view of what's actually going on here? Is there an increase in new infection rate happening in the herd? Is it particularly any particular group of cows? Do I have a reduced response rate to the treatment protocol I've got? Any of those herd level questions that could be really informed by these data streams are either too hard to get the data out, or there's no real metrics available. And I was saying to the other group, I sort of almost, I wasn't sure whether to say this or not, but I almost feel that we've gone backwards in that area. Like 10 years ago, most people were, for instance, would get their cell counts. If they were milk recording, they get their cell counts. You could pop them into something like a mastitis focus report. The science was sitting there behind it. We'd done 18 months worth of science in that. We knew all the metrics, which cows do you include in which calculations. The vets and others knew how to read them. Lots of farmers got them as well, used them as monitoring and that sort of thing. Now we've got a whole heap of farms that have got conductivity coming through, or amended RMTs, or some sort of cell count analysis or whatever, that all comes into a reporting system that doesn't necessarily have the science behind it. And talking to the service providers, one guy said to me, I went and, the report that comes out is a 7-day average of cows' cell counts. I don't know how to read that. I don't know how to help that farmer. In essence, I think we're at a point where actually really learning how to get back in and find that data and do something with it is a really important challenge for the industry. Now, I know Datagene's looking to try and put the centralised data repository together, and there are industry points of interest around this, but The picture, if you get the bird's eye picture from New South Wales, it's pretty chaotic out there in terms of actually really helping farmers make herd level productivity decisions. And given the sorts of investments that are going in, they're happy and content with what they're doing day to day with cows, but there's some real opportunity there that it would be a great pity if we didn't capture it. A bit like Frank Tyndall said yesterday in terms of understanding the metrics around feeding. So last slide, how are we on our scorecard? We're right. Last slide, how are we going? Single system technologies are integrating well. Mix and match is patchy. No signs of resolution anytime soon. Very little herd level analysis. But on the day-to-day things, farmers are satisfied, they've got a lot of experience to share, and mostly they feel like they're setting up okay on farm. So there's some definite industry lessons and farm lessons out of that space. So great project to be involved with. Thanks, Patricia.
Any quick question for Pauline, and please Pauline, quick answers as well, because we are running out of time.
I'm happy to talk over lunch with anybody, and I don't think I'm the main game here. The main game is the young scientists. So let's.
Very quick one. Did you find any correlation with profitability or I guess productivity at least?
Not looking at that. Okay. We didn't ask that question. The questions we had were what's out there, how are people using it. That's another good next question, but yeah.
Mine was along those lines. I think if we could link it to either DFMP data or dairy-based data by the number of key technologies adopted, I think that'd be pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, dairy-based, we've gone a fantastic spot. We've almost flipped over. Dairy-based, we've now got tools and standardised metrics and all the things we didn't have. And in terms of some of the cow management stuff, we've sort of gone backwards. Okay, so...
Timeline for having that information published?
September. Yeah, so we're just at the point of telling people about it and getting it up. Yeah. No, over lunch.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, because Patricia is going to tell us about fencing.
Yes. Alrighty, good afternoon, I think it is, close to. I can't hear, okay. So I'm Patricia and I'm here to talk to you about some of my prelim findings of an experiment, my first experiment as part of my PhD. I conducted this time last year, and I was looking at the virtual fencing technology and what that means for dairy cattle. So in particular, focusing on their behaviour and learning. So I have been using these automated virtual fencing collars designed by the company Adjacens, and they essentially, you can control your cows remotely. So you use a web-based platform and you can draw up your virtual fence boundary, and that is sent to these collars that are on your cows. So this area is known as the inclusion zone, and everything outside of your virtual fence boundary is the exclusion zone. So while your cows are in this area, they can freely graze, but at what point she will reach the virtual fence boundary, that's when she will receive that warning audio tone. And if she continues her forward movement outside of this, that's when she'll get that electric pulse. So the collar has those paired cues, and the cows are able to learn to associate those two cues and remain within the boundary. So when the animal responds by either stopping her movement or turning around, she won't receive any more of those cues because she's facing the correct direction and exhibiting the correct behaviour that you're wanting. So she can freely move back into your inclusion zone without getting punished for that behaviour. So that's how that technology works. So what I focused on was, it was during the drought at the time, so we didn't have access to pasture. So I designed an artificial paddock setup with one side of the virtual fence and a feeder tracted at the other end. And I had 24 cows. And I divided them into two treatment groups, and the treatment groups just referred to how I trained them initially with this virtual fence, and training just involved giving them time to experience those cues, because that's essentially how you need to train these animals. They need to learn the audio. If they don't respond to the audio, they'll get that electric pulse. So the first 12 cows I trained individually to this laneway design, and the other 12 I put into 2 groups of 6. So by doing this, I wanted to look at the difference in the animal learning when they were on their own and in a group, and to see if there was a group effect. So this was done for 6 days until all their responses were consistent, and that's when I crossed those treatments over. So the cows that were initially trained individually, I placed into a group, and those that were trained as a group, I took out and tested on their own. And I wanted to look at the level of learning transfer across those contexts. So what did I find? Okay, so there's 2 main findings that I'll be discussing. The first being that so all cows it did not matter the treatment they were in, decreased the probability of reaching the feed over the tests. So reaching the feed essentially means they've broken through that virtual fence boundary. So it means the animals were able to learn those virtual fence cues over time and respond, so they were contained more. The second important finding I found was that the animals that were trained in a group setting, when they were removed and tested on their own, they had a higher probability of reaching that feed, so breaking through more, than those that were initially trained as individuals and then placed in a group. So we attributed that to the time we gave those animals in the training. When they're in a group setting, not all the cows actually experienced the virtual fence themselves, so they didn't have that opportunity to learn, and also some animals take a little bit longer to establish that learning, so there definitely was an effect of the group. So what we carried on from here was that it's obviously a bit impractical to be training each cow of your herd individually to the virtual fence. So we're focused on the group, and we wanted to give them more time with their friends. Oh, sorry. There we go. So what we've done is, from here, we've designed a training protocol that is really looking at extending their training phase. So this is done over 6 consecutive days on pasture. Lucky I got an irrigated plot of land, and also included a moving fence line. So on day 3, the virtual fence is moved up, and this design allows all members of the herd to freely move around and interact with that virtual fence on their own accord, and with that moving fence line really reinforces that learning, as so they're not relying on landmarks because they are visual creatures. So what we've found is that during this time, there were 6 days, there was a 99% containment rate, and just pretty good. And so the next step I'm looking at is really honing in on this data I've collected, looking at the variation between individuals because they all respond a little differently, and applying some of my behavioural traits. So I've collected their temperament, their dominance ranking, and are really trying to answer that why to that 1% we're seeing.
Thanks, Patricia.
Yeah, I'll get to.
Have you used anything around about being able to virtually herd them with this technology?
Our group personally, no. So this is part of the Department of Ag's R&D for Profit program, and CSIRO is on board, and their main sort of objective is looking at it to use for herding purposes. I believe they have several papers that are discussing its potential or experimental work so far. It needs a bit of work to do that. Just with the way the cues are set up, it's more of a containment. It's hard to then train the animals to remain contained in an area, but also, you need to move as well. Yeah. More research. Pretty much all the answers.
David.
That was really good. What's your gut feel about whether this will ultimately work?
So So for really strict strip grazing, that's my next experiment I'm actually currently in the middle of. I'm going to look at strip grazing with this technology and really take pasture readings, detailed pasture readings on how much they utilise in that area, and also measure on the opposite side of the virtual fence. So with that 1% of the breakthroughs, it's really consistent with certain animals that are wanting to break through. They do respond, but at what point they respond, it may be 5 to 10 metres outside of your virtual fence. So I see it's seen great potential with beef. A lot of the companies really, focused on beef. With dairy, I think if you had it on your dries or your heifers out I know some farmers are talking to me that they use it kind of like a beef system, they're just freely grazing, definitely. I'll have more answers, I'll probably be here next year and I'll have more answers about the strip grazing, but we're hopeful as the technology progresses. We hope so, yeah.
Maybe 2 more questions.
Have you looked or plan to look at any other motivation factors like cows on heat and bulls, or cows with recent calves?
Yes. So I also did another experiment that looked at hunger. So I had 24 that were fed maintenance and 24 fed ad lib, these were these ladies getting trained. The only breakthroughs I saw were for maintenance. So that was again on the artificial strip grazing setup. So to look at that, we've implemented it in the strip grazing. We're trying to see if we can hold them off fresh pasture. So that will look at feed motivation. We don't have any bulls at my research farm, but that would be something to look into. You'd obviously have to set up safeguards because they might be highly motivated. But yeah, I think that's future work. We've only got access to these automated collars last year, so we're really just like fresh into it, trying to do as much as we can. But we've got a lot of other research groups that are we're all kind of come together with a big picture.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we'll finish it up there. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we saw yesterday that the integration of robotic systems is possible in pasture-based systems. However, we identified that there was a need of an economic evaluation because there were few studies in the world and none of them use commercial data for the comparisons between conventional farms and automatic farms. So what we did was to collect data from 14 robotic farms across all the regions in Australia during 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, and we compared these farms with 100 conventional farms that were in the same dairy regions and that had similar herd sizes to these robotic farms. We used the dairy-based methodology, and the conventional farms were from the Dairy Farm Monitor project. So we did a comprehensive comparison of physical and economic indicators. So in addition, the other objective was to identify gaps for improving productivity and profitability in robotic farms. So overall, we found that the physical performance of robotic farms and conventional farms was similar. Here I put three of the indicators that we analyzed. We analyzed more than 50, but for example, solids per hectare or solids per cow, that it's milk production per cow, or pasture graze per cow were similar between the two systems on average. Also, we analyzed the profitability, and here I included the main profitability indicators that are operating profit or EBIT and return on assets. And again, on average, we found that they were similar. Also, what we found that there was a really big variation within robotic farms. For example, there are some farms that are achieving around 1.6, $1.8 per kilo of milk solids, whereas there are other farms that are losing money. So the variation is really high. The same in conventional farms, of course. What we identified is that there are two factors that are really determinant in the profitability of robotic farms and are the capital costs and the labor costs. We found that the capital costs were higher for robotic farms in comparison to conventional. I mean, depreciation, interests, and repairs and maintenance were higher for robotic farms, and the labor costs were similar between the two systems. So one way to measure the labor cost or measure the efficiency is by quantifying the amounts of cows managed per full-time equivalent or per unit of labor. We found here that the average of the robotic farms was around 108 cows per full-time equivalent, and it was really similar to the conventional average. But as we can see here, the variation within the robotic farms was really high. And if we put this in money, for example, this bottom farm is spending 54% of the income in labor costs, whereas this guy here is spending 13% of the income in labor costs. So the variation is massive, and we have a really important gap to explore here. There are other studies done in Australia by Juan Molfino that is here. He monitored 5 farms, and on average they were achieving 180 cows per full-time equivalent on average. So it is possible to achieve that. It's been achieved. A way to quantify the capital cost is by quantifying the robot efficiency, or the milk harvested per robot per day. That's one of the main KPIs for robotic farming. And again, here the variation is really important. If we put this in money, this guy here is spending 32% of the income in capital cost, and this guy here is spending 14%. And we are also running another benchmarking program where we are monitoring 17 farms, just physical indicators, 17 farms from Australia, New Zealand and Ireland, pasture-based system, robotic farms. And there are some farms achieving consistently around 2,000 liters per robot per day. This program has been running during 3 years. This is the 3rd year. And this will represent spending 10% of the income in capital costs. So it's really important, the variation that we found. The next step will be to dig deeper into what are these guys doing, and of course what are these guys doing, to try to understand how to maximize this, and of course maximize profitability and make these systems more attractive for farmers. So thank you, and if you have any questions.
Just looking at labour efficiency
Yeah.
chart. I mean, on the previous chart you talked about income and profitability. Isn't it important that we measure the profitability either on a income versus cows per full-time equivalent? Because the number of cows that I milk doesn't
Yeah.
dictate anything about my
No, it's ideally it's better to measure it by milk solids per full-time equivalent, not by cows. But I used this. It was the trend. It was similar, but I used this number just because it was easier to understand, and we have a little bit more reference, and also because this study also only used cows per full-time equivalent. So I wanted, but the trend and the results were really similar.
And if the farmer's making their own conserved feed versus having contractors doing work, how is that taken into account on that chart?
You mean the
Labour, so he's making conserved feed, he's getting contractors in to do a lot of other work.
Yeah.
I gather that's only employed labour on that.
No, this is total labor. So includes the sorry, maybe I didn't explain that, but total labor includes the employee labor plus the owner labor or the family labor. We found in general that both labor costs were similar, employee labor and imputed. There was a trend towards lower employee labor for robotic farms, but there were no differences significant. So this includes all the labor of the farm. Yep.
So there was not much difference between, say, feed costs on a conventional AMS farm
No,
or
no.
operating costs?
No.
as such?
No, there were no significant differences. We found differences in some overhead costs like depreciation, interest, and repairs and maintenance, but apparently all those non-significant differences then end up being no different in the profitability, in the final profitability. So in feed costs they were really similar, but at the end, when you end up doing all the calculations, it's similar. The overall profitability was similar.
So the area of exploration now is
Yeah.
what the variance
Yeah. So
is,
now we have 3 years of economic and physical data from these farms. I'm collecting each month data from 17 farms, really detailed physical data. So the idea is to integrate all this, first to understand what's going on with these farmers, and then we are gonna build like a tool that will allow farmers that are planning to invest in the technology to simulate the scenarios. Let's say, what happens if I milk more cows per robot, if I milk more frequent cows, or if I have higher production, how this relates to profit, to return on assets, whatever. So the idea is to integrate all this data to build a model that will help farmers for planning the system.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm John. I'm going to be talking about lameness and automatic lameness scoring. So this is a lameness scoring chart from Dairy Australia from their Healthy Hooves program. And in Australia we've got 4 different classes of lameness, ranging from not lame to severely lame. And when you're lameness scoring cows, there are 5 axes that you should look at, ranging from the walking speed, how the hooves are placed, to the back line, head bob, that sort of stuff. And if you do this systematically, you can get a good idea for the range of lameness in your herd. So who here has actually done this systematically while a cow is walking past? I have. Has anyone else done it? Okay, a few people. So you might have noticed that it was pretty hard to, for example, see the difference between a non-lame cow and a cow that's only mildly lame, because those differences are very small. Picking out a cow in class 3, I think everyone here would be able to do that because the differences are so big. So we want to do this in an automatic way, so we can do it day in, day out, and we want to do it a bit more objectively than humans standing there with a clipboard scoring in a bit of a subjective way. So to do that, we set up the system at our university farm. So the cows have just come off a rotary dairy here, so they're coming off one by one. They go through a gate and there's feed on the other side, so they're motivated to walk through here. We've got 2 sensors up on top, we've got 2 sensors on the side. We've placed them on this repurposed backyard basketball frame, and 2 of them on the top looking down onto the back, so we've got a good idea of the back curvature and the head movement, and 2 of them from the side looking over at what the limbs are doing and how they're being placed. And these sensors that we used are commercial off-the-shelf Microsoft Xbox Kinect sensors, so these were made for a gaming computer at home, so some of you might have seen it. And it's a 3D sensor. So the way that it works is it emits infrared light into the environment, it bounces off objects and it comes back. And depending on how long that light takes to go out and come back, you know how far away this object is. So this sensor has, the way that this depth data looks, we can have a look at that on the next one. So when you take a photo with your smartphone, for example, every single pixel has 3 values, a red, a green, and a blue value. The depth sensor in this Kinect has 2 channels. One of them is just illumination, so it's sort of a grayscale image of the scene, so white things are lighter than dark things. and the depth channel, where each pixel tells you how far away this object is. So this is the depth channel. The white pixels are very far away from the sensor, and the dark blue ones are closer. And the black ones have no return at all because the object is either too far away or isn't reflective enough to actually send any light back to the sensor. So this is a 2D representation of the 3D data. Here we've got sort of an image of a point cloud. So now each point, which is each of those pixels in the previous image, is now a point in XYZ space. And if this was on a computer, I could rotate around it and see the cow from different angles. And you can really see a lot of detail. For example, in the udder, you can see all the individual teats. And in the hooves, you can even see the dew claw. So it's pretty high resolution stuff. So to continue, I'll go back to our previous image. So from this data, I want to detect lameness. And the way that I've chosen to do this is to focus on the trajectories of the hooves. So I've used a neural network to detect these hoof locations. And the way that works is similar to how your phone can detect faces when you're taking photos. So I've labeled about 600 of these images. So I've labeled all the hoof positions. I've taught this algorithm to detect these hoof locations, and then when I feed it new data, it will tell me where it thinks the hooves are. So I've got this sort of pattern of the hooves moving across the ground over time, and I can also see the interaction between the two different hooves and the phase between two pairs of the hooves. So from these hoof trajectories, I can extract different gait metrics. For example, step length, the position of the hooves, how long each hoof is on the ground. And for example, one of the axes for looking at for doing visual lameness scoring is looking at the placement of the rear hoof relative to the front hoof. So normally you expect the front hoof to lift off and the back one to be placed on the exact same position. But when a cow gets more lame, that distance gets larger and larger. So these are the sorts of metrics that I'm using, and I've got about 200 of them for each cow passing. And let's have a look at what the results come out as. So I had 73 cows. About half of them had been classified as being non-lame, and about half of them were either 1, 2, or 3. And this ground truth was obtained from expert scorers who looked at videos and told me how lame these cows were. I was a bit surprised about this ground truth, as it was a bit inconsistent, and I gave them the video twice. And the second time that they saw the video, in 50% of the times, they actually gave it a different score than the first time they saw it. So that's not too good if you're trying to make a system with that as the ground truth. So with these 73 cows, I wanted to classify them into two classes, one being not lame and one class being either 1, 2, or 3. So in bold are the numbers of cows that fall into the correct category. So we've got 25 here, which were correct, and 11 that weren't correct. And then in the more lame side, we've got 17, 5, and 4 that were correct. And notice that the more lame the cow is, the more chance that it will actually be the correct result. Here we've got none of them, which were predicted as not lame when they were lame. So if we count the number of cows that had the correct category versus all of them, we get an accuracy of 70%. So is 70% enough? Is that not enough? Well, if this algorithm was just randomly telling me if the cow was lame or not, would get an accuracy of 50%. And of course, the best would be around 100. And so if you have the cow coming past twice a day after each milking, and you only look at once a day how lame your cows are, then your accuracy will go from 70% to 90% because you've got two readings. And if you look at not the short-term goal of lameness detection, but maybe a longer-term goal, such as genetics and breeding cows that are less susceptible to become lame, then over the lifetime, the 70% accuracy will be fine. Another thing to know is that we've classified these 4 different lameness scores into 2 classes, not lame and lame. Often this is done by grouping 0 and 1s here and 2s and 3s here, but I've chosen to put the 1s into here as well, which makes it even harder because it's hard to see the difference between a class 0 cow and a class 1 cow. So future steps are to use other metrics like the head bob, the back curvature, to try and improve this 70% up to 90%. Thank you. Any
questions? Yeah.
John, I thought that was fantastic. I was just obviously the accuracy is something you're working hard on. Is there any of the data from this sensor that's not valid based on consistency of the movement of the animal through the through the sensor?
So when an object is
pulls up, for instance, as she's going past the sensor, or so I guess my practical thought is going onto a rotary. We've got a single race, and if she pulls up because the cow in front of her stops to look at the stall, is that going to affect the validity?
Yeah, so I've only used cows here that are walking continuously, like if they stop and look or sniff or anything, or slow down, or are obviously walking very slowly, like not at walking speed, then I don't use them.
Okay. What percentage of animals do you find you rule out on those?
About 30%. Okay. But it gets better. So for example, the setup was set up 1 week before I actually did the logging, so that they were used to having that frame there. Yep. It gets better over time.
Have you got an idea of the accuracy if they were going past the sensor 3 times a day?
Well, if it was exactly like this, then you'd have 30% to the power of 3, so you'd get, what is that? Only 3% in accuracy, so it'd be 97% correct, as long as you just only cared if one time it told you if it was lame and you acted on that.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the presentation, very informative and very interesting. Question about, do you think if you can establish the place level pattern of individual cow would help improve?
Yeah. So here I've definitely done it at a herd level. Individualizing it will be better. So I've just recorded about 2 months of data where I logged every single week. And from that I am going to look at whether modeling the cow individually and looking at changes from the baseline, whether that's lame or not lame, will be better than having sort of a herd level threshold. So yeah, that will definitely help.
Are you able to use the LOS tag to link it to the cow? Are you identifying that cow and that?
No, so I'm using the IDs that come out of the rotary, so it's the same order that will come through my system. So I know which cow I'm looking at every time.
Okay, so you've got,
Yep.
So you are IDing it, but using the rotary ID
Yep.
for it. Could you integrate it, say if you weren't going to be near your platform, could you?
Yeah, you could use the spot pattern, for example, on the cow to identify the cow visually, or...
Oh, no, still using LOS.
Oh, okay.
Having that antenna separate to the rotary.
Yeah, you could. Like if there's a setup you could just place anywhere, you'd have a panel reader that reads the cows as they come through.
Fantastic. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.